recording it. Here we go. Welcome to the K12 Tech Forum. And I know many of you, and you've seen this before, but as you know, there's always new people. So I go through a few slides just to get as familiar with the Tech Forum, and then we can get on to the main thing. We have some wonderful guests today, and I'm excited to get to them, but just a few things I need to cover. Oh, got to get on the right screen. I have too many screens. Okay, so cybersecurity is our main topic today with our special guest, Jason Holloway, who you'll meet in a little bit. You guys, if you're not familiar with the Tech Forum, it isn't just me. I have a board of wonderful people that
Lee, you're
got muted accidentally there, Lee.
I'm so sorry, Lee. That was my fault. I was muting people upon entry and it muted everyone.
Oh no. So I got a board of wonderful people, and we selected this board because of who they are and the positions they're in and their support of the Tech Forum. You can go back and check. The slides are available later. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but some wonderful people. Today we have Lynn and Sarah are with me from the board. And Sarah's our official note taker for today.
Dimitri's here too, Lee.
Oh, Dimitri, you're here. Didn't see you. Hi, Dimitri.
Hi, sorry guys, I was in the process of driving, so yes, I'm here.
People are
go
driving.
in a second here.
All right. Okay, so if you don't know, some of you have seen our website. On our website, you can check up on upcoming meetings, and you can also go back. We take notes. We record meetings now that we're virtual, and so you can go back to any of the meetings we've held since May of 2017 and check on what we talked about. And we will be recording today's meeting and sharing the notes and the slides. Future meetings, we meet every month on the most part, so you're welcome. The meetings are always free, and we cover a different topic each month, and that's our future general meetings. And we also, for you super techie geeky people, and I mean geeky in a good way, one of my geeky students ended up marrying my daughter, so now I have a geeky permanently in my family. But we do meet 4 times a year with we call it the Tech Network Support Group, and our next meeting is November 9th. And you're welcome to join that, or please share that with your network. Let them and network support people, because they need a chance to get out from under the pressure and learn a few things now and then too. So we make that just for that group. Another thing I want to cover today is I've been recruited recently there's Welcome the State of Illinois people, the LTC. Hi, Chris. They asked me to help them reach out to schools about their Illinois K12 broadband network program, which basically what that is they're offering secure internet and broadband circuits, routers, security services, and filtering through Cisco umbrella to all schools in Illinois. And basically what it is they'll come in and the ICN will be the internet provider, and the state will cover, the slides are jumping too fast, all the circuits in between at no cost to the districts. So many districts are doing this. If you're not doing this already, see, it covers all services are fully covered. So that basically means you can have 100% covered internet connection through the ICN out to the internet, and the state will cover that. I won't get into details quite how it works, but it can and will be covered. It kind of depends on when you get in. They've been doing this for 3 years. So we just got the people in that'll be going in on 2022. And if you aren't in yet, the next window to jump in will be 2023. So if you need more information, I included that on a slide. You can contact me or any of the people on this slide. And again, this will be in the notes and in the slides if you want to check into this. But I'm out doing the outreach to schools all over Northern Illinois, just to make sure they know about this and are aware of what's available to them. One last piece of business we'll be putting in the chat. We'd like to do a little survey at all our meetings, just so you can provide some feedback and how you like the meeting, and if there's any questions or topics and things like that. And if you have wanted us to follow up with the ICN, we'll be posting that in the chat today. And speaking of chats, if you got any questions, please feel free to submit them via the chat or raise your hand, and we'll address those. Okay. So the main event, what you're here for. And at any time, feel free to ask questions. You don't have to wait till they're all done. Jason is aware of that. So if you really have something, I want to talk about this, just unmute yourself and then, or raise your hand, and we'll make sure that we get your question asked. Okay, but here's what when we create meetings, we think about what important information we want to bring to y'all. And so why did we invite Jason Holloway to speak today, besides my phone ringing off the hook here? Now it's off the hook. But why did we bring Jason Holloway in today? And I thought I'd set that up a little bit by a little brief history of education technology to kind of get us in the mindset and the mind frame of what we're covering today. I found online a very busy graphic of ed tech technology starting from the 80s and through to today. Coincidentally, well, if you look at it, it has the 80s as, if you look at what's outlined in yellow. Can everybody see that? Just want to make sure we're all good. The digital age was the 1980s, when we just started getting into this stuff. It wasn't all over the place, but it was just starting to be there. We had the Apple IIs, the IBM PCs. We had some mini computers and so forth in schools, but not a lot. Not a lot of people were using it. And a lot of times it was the math department in schools who would teach it, or the math teacher who happened to be the tech guy, but there weren't a lot of official tech people. I'm going to come at this from my perspective, if we'll see in a minute. And in the 90s is when things really started kicking in. The Mac came in the late 80s and was really having an impact in the 90s, and computers started expanding. In the 2000s, we started getting into more portable devices, became more popular and common, and then we are to where we are today. So we see the 80s were the age of processing, the 90s were the World Wide Web came into play, connectivity was all about the 2000s, and now we're into personalization of everything. And everything is connected to the internet in some way. As you can see, my career coincidentally happens to track with this timeline. I began back in 1981, and I'm 26 years old now. No, never mind. But I'm 62 now, but I got my first tech position in 1981 at the Lake County Area Vocational Center, teaching high school students how to do key punch entry into an IBM card punch machine. There weren't very many networks then. And from there, I went to Mundelein High School, where I was their tech coordinator, and I taught computer literacy using PFS Write and PFS File to high school freshmen. From there, I was hired in 1986 from the Lake County Educational Service Center, where I supported schools, did their computer repairs, and learned desktop publishing and learned databases and so forth. So being there for 6 years, in 1992, I went to Gurnee School District 56 as their first technology coordinator / director. Did that for 11 years, then went to Zion Benton High School in 2003, where I was the technology director there. So what does all this mean? Well, my experience, I think, is the districts I were at were fairly typical districts. We weren't too rich, we weren't too poor, we could do a lot of cool things technically. But the thing is, I was and am still an educator first and foremost. I'm not an IT expert, and I think that's pretty typical of many of us who are IT leaders in school districts and K12 schools. And that's been my experience. I still see that today. I get to meet a lot of new, young tech directors, and they were teachers, and they just became the tech director in a district, and they were formerly a PE teacher or a science teacher or a third grade teacher. And we're still doing that. So that was and is still typical of many schools. Many schools don't have that. They've gone beyond that, and they hire full-time IT with IT degrees and all that kind of stuff. But that's not everywhere. So what's my point? Is it going to let me go? There we go. So what I've experienced is the security risks. Let's take a look at what I've experienced since the 1980s and security risks. Back in the 80s, this is very rough. This isn't scientific. It's just my throwing this out there. There weren't a lot of security risks in technology for us ed tech people. We didn't worry about anything bad happening. We just really were more concerned with maybe we wasted time or didn't get the best program. We wanted the best educational bang for the buck, but not a lot of security issues until the late 90s, in my experience, in the 2000s, when that started becoming an issue to where now the security risks are through, they're accelerating every day more and more. I used to say when I retired in 2016, I felt like I was walking into a minefield every day, walking through one, because the last few years it started increasing that much. Now the risks to students, I think there weren't any great risks, at least in my experience. Again, yours may be different, but in my experiences, we didn't worry about something bad happening to our students because of the technology we put in our schools. Didn't see it for most of my career until we started getting one-to-one. And then lately, especially, the risks to students have just blown up, and what could happen, the potential risks. Now they can start identity theft and things like that. The things that can happen to students because of today's technologies are very much greater than they were before. So, and finally, I'm going to say the sophistication of our systems and the attacks we're receiving have also just gone up like crazy lately. When I look back, the difference in even the last 10 years of my career and how much things changed and the things we had to concern ourselves with, it's crazy. It's just gone up a lot. So back to my point then, why do we bring someone like Jason Holloway to talk to you guys today, and why are you coming here? I didn't put the answer on here. You'll find out as we go along. But I think for me, just to start with this, ask yourself, why do we need to be interacting and working with and alongside people like Jason Holloway? And as you get to meet Jason, you'll get to see what he brings to the table and why we brought him here today. Jason has a extensive IT background. He's 30 years he's been in the business, and I just learned today he's retired once and he's back at it again. He's got a very strong emphasis on cybersecurity processes and methodology in the business community. He started his career in the Air Force and he became a pilot. I don't understand pilots, how they can get up there and go Mach whatever, flying around in a little tin box that can fall through the ground anytime. But that tells us a little bit about, he's at least an adventurous kind of guy doing that one. He's willing to take risks. He got his degrees in mathematics and computer science, so I suppose that makes him a geek in a good kind of way. And then he went into auditing with the IEEE and ISO 9003 for a period of time. And from there, going into the private sector, he became the CEO of 2 different corporations or companies, all tech-based, and they provided cybersecurity, product development, and other MSP-related services for large corporations and financial institutions and credit unions and healthcare institutions and schools. And he's been around. He's dealt with a lot of different companies in that. Way beyond me, who was an educator who learned IT as I went, but he's truly deep into the IT world. Now he's the president of WidePoint Cybersecurity Solutions. WidePoint is an industry leader, being one of only two external certificate authorities, ECAs, that are authorized by the Department of Defense to issue external certificates using public key infrastructure, or PKI, which is what we're going to learn about today. Jason he's on the bleeding edge, dealing with the real deal. If you're dealing with the Department of Defense and the White House and other clients like that, you're very aware of what's going on. So, like I said before, if you have any questions, raise your hand, put your questions in the chat, but I'm going to turn it over to Jason and he's going to take it. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jason Holloway.
That introduction was so amazing that I think I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect now and quit while I'm way ahead. Because there's no way that I'm going to be able to live up to half of everything you just presented, Lee. So thank you. I really, really, really hope now that I don't disappoint, because the pressure's on, but I'm going to try. So no, in all seriousness, thank you, Lee, for that great introduction. I also wanted to let everybody know that I got a couple of my colleagues that are here today. Jimmy Welsh is also joining me today. He just waved his hand. Jimmy is a critical member of the WidePoint Corporation. He is a former United States Marine. So I continuously thank him for his service. And he's a former IBMer. He was at IBM for quite a while. He led a major division at IBM, and we're certainly happy to have him over at WidePoint, who is in charge of all of the implementation for the phases of PKI for us. So he's going to be assisting me today. And if we get any really super difficult questions, I'm just going to pass the buck over to Jimmy and just ask him to answer it. So he's prepared to do that. And also joining us today, just to make sure that I don't say anything incorrect, is WidePoint's Chief Security Officer, Caroline Godfrey. And she's the one who, I don't know if you can see her. Wave your hand, Caroline. There you go. So Caroline is joining us from Washington, D.C., where you would expect for an organization such as ours to exist. And the one thing I can say about Caroline is I believe she was actually born into the PKI industry, like Lee was saying earlier in terms of being an educator. Caroline is certainly a technologist, but when you sit down and you talk to her and you learn her significant policy experience, it's very clear that she has a PhD in PKI. Not in a literal sense, but when you talk to her, she's certainly equivalent to that. So with that being said, thank you again. So I'm really, really happy to be here. So given that the presentation is being recorded, I'm going to be going off of some prepared remarks today. The reason why that I did that is the strong suggestions from my colleagues, because as Lee and Lynn and others have gotten to know me, my normal style is to run around the room like a crazed maniac and draw on the whiteboard and try to do cartwheels and stuff. So me being trapped in an office and staying focused so that I ensure that I get a clear message across to you all is very important to me. So I'm going to be using some prepared remarks to make sure that that I stay organized. So as Lee said, yes, I've been very, very fortunate to have led a couple of companies. One of the first companies that I was a CEO of, as you saw, was NKS. That stands for Networked Knowledge Systems. And what NKS did, it was actually founded by Linus Torvalds and another guy named Eric Breivik. And it was a Linux company. And so that was Linux Managed Security Services. And we provided firewalls and intrusion detection managed services to a lot of the healthcare industry, the hospitals. Even at that time, we did have some schools, but primarily a couple of our customers were IBM, and we were doing all of Asia Pacific for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So, kind of definitely cut my teeth within the security industry. From there, you saw that I was the CEO of Next Century. That was a company that myself and another, my COO, had founded together, and we were working in a highly regulated financial industry. So I know all about, having to make sure that that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed to, that all of the, technology stuff, especially when you're dealing with money, as I'm sure you can all imagine. You got to make sure that everything's there and nothing's missing. Nobody's running off with it. So security, once again, was very important for that. So the most fun, though, that I'm having is being at WidePoint. The reason why is because, PKI is so important. I am going to be getting into that here in 1 second. The one thing I did want to say, though, is that, again, just so you all know that how the strength of the company and the level of the program, this was something that from an external certificate authority was originally birthed through the Department of Defense. Some of our employees were actually a part of 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 that original endeavor from its inception. So a lot of the policies that were originally written are still employees of WidePoint today. We couldn't be luckier to have such subject matter experts on our staff. And as we get into this presentation, you'll hear me talk about the term certificate authority and how that relates and ties into PKI. And our team, WidePoint ORC, was actually there when one of the first certificate authorities for the United States Navy was stood up. So safe to say, from a accreditation standpoint, our organization has just about every one of them that you can possibly have. Anything from an authority to operate to being FISMA moderate, meeting all of the various circulars from the DoD and the federal government. So yeah, it's a really good organization that again has has done a great job, basically from its inception. Okay, so let me go ahead and get into the presentation and what exactly I'm going to be covering. So what I'm going to start with is K through 12, using K through 12 as a use case for public key infrastructure, because it's important that I set the groundwork within you all's environment, something that you're used to. Okay, so we'll go through that as a use case, and we'll talk about some of the horror stories and some things that are still working, and how K through 12 can certainly improve itself. From there, we'll go into the origins of PKI, or public key infrastructure, and I'm going to talk about what it is, how does it work, why is it so important in today's digital age, because we all know that everybody says, oh, we're going to go back to normal. No, we're not going to go back to normal. This is the new norm. So it is what it is, and good enough is not good enough anymore. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of the common challenges that PKI solves, and then I'm going to close with my favorite topic, and this kind of like mission, sort of like the the Blues Brothers, where they were on a mission. I'm on a mission to eliminate username and passwords. I don't think it has any place here anymore. PKI certainly does away with that. I do believe that just eliminating that one little piece of technology really solves a lot of issues, and that's something that we're going to jump into and cover. Okay, so one of the most explosive uses for PKI that is just now taking off centers around authenticating and securing a wide variety of IoT devices. These use cases span across the school system, like cameras and printers, door readers, all of these things. So there's been numerous examples. So I'm going to start with a few that are outside of the K through 12, and then I'll get it more into specific ones for the school. So first one, Home Depot, where there was a data breach. Okay, maybe you guys have heard about that, but just to let you know the level of sophistication, there were hackers that were able to access their point of sale system by getting onto the network, posing as an unauthenticated HVAC unit. So who would have ever thought to come through an HVAC unit? I mean, the amount of thought process and the insane routes that the actors are taking is, again, they're only limited to their imagination. SolarWinds is another one that has been in the news quite a bit. So originally you have SolarWinds that is supposed to be setting the standard, if you will, in terms of security, but then they had a machine-to-machine breach within their data center. So that's not a good thing. So suffice to say, they were not using PKI. Colonial Pipeline is another one that's been in the news from unhacking. JSB Meatpacking Company, Facebook has even been breached. And where I'm at down here in Florida, we had a water treatment factory that was breached. And that's dangerous. I mean, when you start releasing, different levels of chlorine and all of these other chemicals into the water, that's something that can be, certainly life-threatening. And then the one that everybody thought, because of all of the discussion around blockchain and everything, even Bitcoin has been breached to the tune of $600 million. So again, no one is really safe here. There's a couple of things that I'll tell you specific to the schools that we've been seeing, because as I stated earlier, talking about securing the cameras and the printers and the door readers and things like that. We talked to a number of districts, and when we talked to them about the cameras that they're using, unfortunately, we're way beyond the kid who was sitting in the basement who just wants to go out and hack something and annoy, an organization. Okay, this has turned into not only a business to to gain revenue in terms of just stealing money outright, or stealing people's PII data. But unfortunately, there's another very dangerous side to this. Okay, and unfortunately it's happening more and more at schools. And what it is that people are using cameras that are connected or have an IP address to it to learn behaviors and movements within the school. If you have on average anywhere from 50 to 100 cameras within the organization, all you have done is you've given 50 to 100 sets of eyeballs to potentially some very bad actors. And what they want to do is they want to learn, how do the staff move? What time do they move? Where are the door entries? Where are the windows? What is the layout of the particular school? These are very, very scary things. Unfortunately, they are very real examples of some horrible things that could potentially go wrong. And it's something that schools need to take into consideration, because again, what was once good enough in terms of protection is not good enough anymore. One of the other things too is that, the harvesting and the farming of data. And what I mean by that is that, as I said, with COVID, this is the new norm. So we had the remote, learning that was taking place, and I'll come back to that and talk about some of the breaches that were associated with it. However, the one thing I wanted to point out ahead of time is that the kids have never been more, I'll say, vulnerable, and more of a doorway back to their parents in terms of almost an unprotected portal, if you will, to their PII data. So what is happening is that when you've got the younger kids, and if you're talking like K through 4 or whatever, and they're walking around with their Chromebooks, and for any reason they go home and they connect to their home's Wi-Fi, it's very simple to execute a Trojan-based attack and hide, specific algorithms of code that could then piggyback onto a parent system. And then from there, there's all kinds of PII breaches, healthcare data and all kinds of things that can be downloaded. Okay. In addition to that, and this one's pretty scary to me, is that the older kids who are, getting ready to go off to college, that have these, these laptops and machines, or through their iPads or whatever devices that they're going to continue to keep. Okay. And they're starting to store some of their data in the cloud. And I'll talk about cloud and my opinions about cloud. They're very patient. And even though they don't have any credit card data or a lot of, access to finances and things like that, this is where the harvesting and the farming comes in, because they're patient. They're going to wait. And this is something that they use, these types of students, and they follow them through college. They follow them as they start to build credit. They follow them as they start to receive, loans from higher education and things like that. And these are very simple ways to be able to intercept, steal money, again, track their progress, and eventually, gain access to their PII data as well. Okay, so just a couple of points that I wanted to bring up as we get started. So now, why is K through 12 a common use case for PKI? and we're going to see a graph here. So this graph is voluntary. Okay, so this K-12 resource center statistic, again, these are schools that are volunteering this information. So imagine the schools that are not putting this data that's out there. So when you look at the K-12 cyber incident map, just from 2016, there have been 1,180 incidents. Okay, so you know, as you look at across the the spectrum there, this is again, this is quite a bit. The other thing to remember is that all of these types of breaches and incidents, they're I mean, it could be a litany of things. So again, this is just the voluntary data. The global use, however, of PKI is not only K through 12, but also higher education, which will enable increased information sharing and technological collaboration in a much more pervasive fashion than is possible today. So PKI allows secure and controlled sharing of intellectual property and research and teaching materials. So PKI adoption hurdles are lower than ever, right now, and the benefits are greater than ever. It is clear that schools need stronger cybersecurity at this time. Again, this is why we're here and discussing this. And this is not only within the schools, it's across a lot of different organizations. So, but these are the things that should include countermeasures like effective access controls for the network, especially for the administrative back end of schools' database, people within the HR department, resources in charge of payroll. Those are the things, and obviously applications that are associated with the learning and the students themselves. So obviously, this is the time for a lot of the schools to start taking the plunge, at least at a very small level, and further in the conversation, I'll address how that can be done, little things that schools can do to help themselves. So according to the 2020 state of K-12 cybersecurity, so there was a year in review, a report from K-12 Cybersecurity Resource Center in 2020 was a record-breaking year for attacks in schools, with more than 400 incidents recorded. So the attacks, they all varied in particular type. Obviously, the most common is phishing. I mean, this is something that we're all very, very familiar with. Phishing has become also, unfortunately, part of the new norm. The other thing is data breaches. Very familiar with that. And then something that schools are now definitely no stranger to, unfortunately, is the ransomware. So the ransomware attacks are certainly on the rise. So again, to understand the scale of this problem, let's look at the Los Angeles Times reported as many as 500,000 students and staff at the San Diego's Unified School District may have had their personal data stolen by cyber criminals. This was in 2018. That breach was so severe that it included social security numbers, dates of birth, phone numbers, and private healthcare information. Okay, so again, these are scary things, and nothing is pretty much off the table in terms of what they want to get their hands on. So why is K through 12 cybersecurity? Why is it so important? So really during this discussion, I don't like to sugarcoat anyways, but there's definitely no way to sugarcoat that breaches of this magnitude are happening all over the place in virtually every single public setting. Hackers tend to look for weakly guarded systems. Unfortunately, it's common for school districts to have those due to limited resources for IT and cybersecurity. I mean, when you look at the number of students and the number of teachers, and what we've been seeing in terms of the number of the IT staff, Jimmy likes to say all the time that if a school was IBM, that IT staff would be 50 people. Unfortunately, at what we're seeing is it's anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 or 9 at the most, and they've got their hands full doing a lot of other things, right? So there's thousands of students, their families, faculty, and staff that are having their privacy invaded, all the time. So they're at risk of fraud, identity theft, and online harassment. That's obviously, up today as well. Admissions and other sensitive educational processes such as special ed grants are at risk if sensitive information is exposed online. So data breaches affects the districts. It not only it affects the district's reputation, and it diminishes the community's trust in the schools because again, it's just so widespread and it's very difficult to keep it under control. So now let's look at the challenges of school cybersecurity that was part of the COVID-19 pandemic, okay? So while security incidents in school follow common patterns, the COVID-19 pandemic brought new challenges to the table. The frequency of cyber attacks was following usual patterns until the second semester of 2020, where there were methods of attacks changed the security landscape for the worst. So this was what I was alluding to earlier. The adoption of remote learning paved the way for 3 new cyber incidents. The first one is the class invasion, okay, where malicious actors interrupt classes, breaching the security measures of meeting software such as Zoom and Google Meet and others. There's a litany of them that a lot of people are using, okay? That same tactic can be seen in the so-called meeting invasion, where actors target things like PTA meetings, virtual graduations, or educators, meeting instead of classes. And then the third attack is the email invasion, where a closed email system, or more specifically like a faculty's email, gets compromised for the purpose of sharing very malicious links and or non-appropriate type photos. So scary. The next section that I'd like to cover is what was once good is no longer good enough without PKI. Okay, it's just not. There was a point in time where the examples that I'm about to give you were good enough security measures for protecting the K-12 environment. Unfortunately, today's hackers are so sophisticated that none of the examples I'm about to discuss are sufficient to stop any of the breaches I discussed earlier without the deployment of PKI. Again, back to the staff that I'm lucky enough to work with. I mean, if you can imagine how much of a problem it is just in a K-12 environment. I mean, you should see the different types of attacks that are trying to happen to the Department of Defense and or the federal government all the time. I mean, it's very scary. So, for example, antivirus software. Antivirus software is just incapable of stopping today's sophisticated attacks. That's certainly one that's at the top of what was good is not good enough, just because of the way that it operates, the username and password that's affiliated with it, and the types of things that it looks for. Second thing is that it would be hardware-based firewalls. Now, it's not all bad for firewalls. A solid firewall and network filters that are on-prem, those are access points, those access points are still a must. So I mean, I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying get rid of the firewalls or if you're running IDSs and things like that. However, PKI is certainly a required addition to a firewall and an IDS, okay? DNS quality. So historically, constantly, updating the DNS while that helps close the gaps and exploits, that can lead to the extraction of valuable data such as usernames and passwords and general personal information. However, without the deployment of PKI and eliminating username and passwords, updating DNS is really no longer good enough. And then here's my personal fave is the migrating to the cloud. Okay, so I'm just going to state the obvious. Let's not forget what the term cloud really means. Okay, term cloud only means the other guy's computer. Okay, the other person's computer. So the thing to realize is that I'm in no way, shape, or form saying don't use the cloud. Certainly use the cloud. I think it's great. It's a money saver and all of that other stuff. However, there's zero guarantee that they're operating within a PKI environment. And I would just suggest that if you are going to use a cloud provider, that you just kind of do your homework, because if they are PK enabled and they are using PKI, then it's probably safe to say that they're going to be touting it. Okay. To kind of back this up a little bit, Cyberscoop, which you guys might be familiar with, this is a really good publication and stuff for you guys to affiliate yourself with. They just released this previous Monday that the report regarding Cozy Bear. Okay, I love all the names. So Cozy Bear, or the Russian hacking agency, so-called Nobilium, and we've known about Nobilium for some time now. Since May of 2021, Cozy Bear has sought to infiltrate technology resellers, all of the cloud software companies, and managed service providers, in attempt to piggyback on those firms' access to other customers. So it's exactly what I was saying when I said it's the other person's computer. If it doesn't have the applicable security parameters or controls around it, they're no more safe than the example that I gave earlier of the student going home and connecting to the Wi-Fi and people going in and being able to get to their data. It's essentially the same process. So it's not all this is not all gloom and doom, though. Okay, so the following are some are good practices, and are more importantly, they actually complement PKI. So a lot of things that you all are doing are still very good. Number one is still backing up data. That is absolutely still a must. Data loss is a common consequence of malware and breaches and ransomware. So by backing up your data, you can often revert to a safe point before the damage happened. So wherever that is, go back. So I would certainly advocate for a really good backing up of your data. Get that onto a really good regular schedule, so in the event that something like that happens. The other one is whitelisting. Okay, whitelisting is still great. I mean, operating with the list of approved apps and programs on systems that limit outside applications from running. I mean, this is something that absolutely still has to be done, and is a good practice of the K-12 IT group. And my favorite, and my chief security officer here, Caroline, she's going to be shaking her head yes, is security awareness training. We are huge advocates of security awareness training. It is such an invaluable practice to train administrators, teachers, students about cybersecurity through professional security companies or IT staff. For example, if people are savvier about phishing, they will be less likely to click on malware links. As I said before, because we are in the new norm of just everything remote and everything technology, and everybody walking around with one of these. The more that we can educate, the better. Okay, so still a huge fan of that. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears now and start with the origins of PKI, because I laid a lot of bad stuff on everybody, and that's certainly not the intent. However, I'm here to again to educate on a lot of the stuff that we're seeing in the industry. So and now we're going to start talking about how to fix some of these issues. So let's begin again with the origins of PKI. So these challenges that are facing K-12, okay, the Department of Defense, they created a program to secure communication and ultimately eliminate username and password. Okay, so that's where a lot of this stuff really originally began. So the External Certificate Authority, or ECA, That's a program that's sponsored by the US Department of Defense, Public Key Infrastructure, or what we call DoD PKI, in response to the Department of Defense Instruction 8500. Okay, so they put out all these publications. This specific directive stipulated, among other things, that all Department of Defense information systems must employ risk management to secure access to information. Under this program, external contractors must have a PKI-based digital certificate issued by an authorized issuer to securely communicate with DoD and/or authenticate to a DoD information system. As Lee said earlier, there are only 2 DoD-approved issuance vendors in the world, and WidePoint is one of them. We are happy that there is another one because the Department of Defense says that you cannot have one authorized vendor out there being a monopoly. Okay, so if that was the case, then they would go to Plan B and probably take it in-house, and then I wouldn't be able to be sitting here talking to you guys. They're okay with a duopoly, so we work very well with with the other company. The in addition to that, I mean, if you've done a little bit of research online, I mean, obviously there are certainly other providers out there that are issuing PKI certs. However, they're either using Microsoft's free certificate authority, and all I'll say about that is you kind of get what you pay for, or other companies that could be a client of one of the approved ECA vendors. That does happen from time to time, or they're standing up CAs kind of in a different way, because there's all different flavors of credentials, and we're not going to get into all of the different flavors on this call. That's not the intent here. However, a point that I want to make is that this is a very complex subject, and when you start to go out and you're looking for different organizations, again, it's very important that you do your homework, that you are finding the right types of people to work with that really understand all of the policies. Okay, and I think it's also important that to make sure that whoever you pick to do this is that that they're going through the most stringent audits on a regular basis from by the Department of Defense and the federal government and everybody else that's involved with it. Okay. So what exactly is PKI? So PKI, it governs the issuance of digital certificates. It governs the issue of digital certificates to protect sensitive data, provide unique digital identities for users. It does it for devices and applications. And lastly, it secures end-to-end communications, because we're not only talking people, we are also talking machines, right? Machine to machine, because as I mentioned earlier, we talked about cameras. There's things that you guys are doing with printers. We've learned that a lot of the printers within the school systems use various key fobs to be able to get on there and do some printing. So today's organizations, they rely on PKI to manage security through encryption. Specifically, the most common form of encryption used today involves a public key, which anyone can use to encrypt a message, and a private key, also known as a secret key, which only the person will be able to use to decrypt those messages. Now, I'll give an example. So in a minute, these keys, they can be used by people, devices, or applications, okay? So PKI security governs encryption keys through the issuance and management of digital certificates. These PKI certificates, they verify the owner of a private key and the authenticity of that relationship going forward to help maintain security. So really these certificates, they're kind of sort of like a driver's license or like a passport for the digital world is one way that you can think about it. Okay. So to understand how PKI works, it's important to go back to the basics that govern encryption in the first place. So with that in mind, let's dive into the cryptographic algorithms and digital certificates. So if you were looking at for a point in time to kind of go to sleep, now would be the time. No, I'm just joking. Don't go to sleep. I'll start with the building blocks of the public key cryptography. Okay, cryptography algorithms are defined highly complex mathematical formulas used to encrypt and decrypt messages. They are also building blocks of PKI authentication. Okay. So these algorithms, they range in complexity, and the earliest ones, they even surprisingly predate modern technology. So what we'll do is we'll start with symmetric encryption. And when I'm done talking about symmetric encryption, I'll go into asymmetric encryption. And then I'm going to show you a picture after talking about all this complexity, and I'll show you visually how it works at a very high level. Okay. So with symmetric encryption, a message that gets typed in plain text goes through mathematical permutations to become encrypted. The encrypted message is difficult to break because the same plain text letter does not always come out the same in the encrypted message. So for example, the message, somebody types HHH, okay, that would not encrypt to the 3 of the same characters. Okay, so to both encrypt and decrypt the message, you need the same key, hence the name symmetric encryption. While decrypting messages is exceedingly difficult without the key, the fact that the same key must be used to encrypt and decrypt the message carries significant risk. Okay, so that's because if the distribution channel used to share the key gets compromised, then the whole system for securing the messages is broke. Okay, so this is where asymmetric encryption comes into, and this is what I'm going to cover now. So what is it? Asymmetric encryption or asymmetrical cryptography solves the exchange or sharing the problem that plagued symmetric encryption. It does so by creating 2 different cryptographic keys, hence the name asymmetric encryption. Okay, and the end result is a private key and a public key. So with asymmetric encryption, a message still goes through mathematical permutations to become encrypted, but requires a private key. Okay, which only in the possession of the recipient. Okay, it can that be used to decrypt, and a public key, which can be shared with anyone to encrypt a message. All right, so that was a mouthful. Let me now run through the slide that'll give you the example, okay, of how that works. There we go. So that whole mouthful of symmetric and asymmetric and all that stuff. Okay, let's look at this. So we have a teacher, and the teacher wants to send the principal a message, okay, an email message or whatever. And it starts out in plain text. So then the teacher gets the principal's public key. Now there's 2 ways that you can find out what a person's public key is. The easiest thing to do is if you don't know that person's public key, if you don't know the principal's public key, then all the principal has to do is shoot you an email with the digital signature on there, and then you'll automatically have the public key. There's other ways to do it within various email platforms that you can go to what's called a key store, and you can look up a particular person's public key from there. Okay, the point is it's not difficult, right? So the teacher has the plain text. She uses the public key to send the message. That's where the encryption happens. Once that encryption happens, that message turns into ciphertext, which cannot be read by anybody. the only one that can decrypt that message is the person who is holding the private key. That's the principal. Once the principal uses the private key to decrypt the ciphertext, it turns it back into plain text. Okay, so this is where public and private asymmetric key encryption, this is basically how it works. So it doesn't look that difficult. However, there's a lot of, again, mathematical stuff that's happening behind the scenes that makes this thing, really, really, really powerful. In fact, to kind of drive the point home is that, again, even though the slide makes it look simple, it's important to note, though, that the mathematical properties that are used to generate private and public keys is again, it's very complex. So specifically, the bit strength of it is 2048. It's a 2048 bit algorithm that randomly generates two prime numbers that are each 1024 bits long, and then multiplies them together. Okay, so the answer to that equation is the public key, while the two prime numbers that created the answer are the private key. Okay, so again, as you can see, that's why in today's standards, the quantum computing power, excuse me, that it would take to to be able to breach it, it does not exist today. In fact, in yesterday's session, I didn't mention this, and I should have, and I'm going to obviously talk about it right now, is that the DoD actually works very closely with Israeli intelligence, and I like to tell this point to a lot of people because they have a lot of very sophisticated programs, and one of their programs that you all might be familiar with is a program that's called Pegasus. Okay, they are constantly testing all of these different solutions against Pegasus, and it's important to note that Pegasus has been able to breach essentially every form of security out there, with the exception of PKI. So the old saying, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." This is a reason why that PKI again is still very much in play, and why it is so powerful. And because again, the quantum computing power takes that it would take is just it's unheard of right now. So this approach, this particular approach works because without the required, again, power behind it, it is nearly impossible to reverse the computation when it involves two prime numbers of that size. Okay, so just to close on asymmetric encryption, I'll give you just a few other examples that it also powers, and things that you guys might not be aware of. You'll go, "Oh, cool, I didn't know that." One is like SSH algorithms, encrypted email, which we've discussed, code signing, Bitcoin or blockchain, and digital signatures. Okay, so quite a bit that's out there. So from here now, I'm going to move into the role of the digital certificates and where and how PKI come into into play. So we're going to now focus on the role of the digital certs. Okay.
Hey, Jason, just wanted to cut in, and Jimmy, maybe this might be a good time. Lee was saying to see if you want to first take a breath, and then additionally see if there's any questions.
Sure. Absolutely. Anybody?
Yep, just want to give folks a chance to, if you want to take a breath, this is a lot to absorb. So I get it. This is not my first time through it, and keeps it all just, I don't know, but
Jason, we wanted to give you an opportunity to take a drink also, because it's a lot of information you're providing today. So
yeah, thank you. I got my trusty Yeti next to me. I forgot my Yeti yesterday, but I made it through it. But we've got a few more sections, just a few more sections to go, and then we can get into some real good Q&A, I think, once we can kind of put a bow on the whole thing as well. So okay, cool. I'll keep going. So
thanks.
Yep. No, thank you. Thank you, Jimmy, for doing that. So, all right. So PKI, it governs encryption keys by issuing and managing digital certificates. Okay. So digital certificates are also called X509 certificates and PKI certificates. Okay, so you probably have, if you're familiar at all with PKI, then you had to have heard X509. So the digital certificate, that particular digital or these particular digital certificates, they have these qualities. Okay, it's an electronic equivalent of a driver's license or a passport, because I said earlier that's kind of a good way to think of it. It contains information about an individual or entity. It is used from a trusted third party, and we'll talk about who some of those third parties are and should be. It's typically tamper resistant. It contains information that can prove its authenticity, or i.e. the fancy word that Caroline uses, which is non-repudiation. It can be traced back to the issuer. It has an expiration date, and lastly, is presented to someone or something for the validation. Okay, so the easiest way to understand how PKI governs digital certificates to verify identities is to think of it as, again, a digital DMV. I like to use that same analogy. Okay, so much like the DMV, PKI introduces a trusted third party to make decisions about assigning identities to a digital certificate. And much like driver's license, digital certificates include information that identifies the owner and has an expiration date. Okay. And finally, it's up to the person verifying the digital certificate to determine what that verification process should be and how carefully the certificate should be vetted based on the use case. So this is where, again, a lot of those upfront policies, come into play. We like to, as we're out educating communities, one thing I learned very quickly and had, beat into my brain is that when you're talking about a PKI deployment as a whole, it's really 80% policy driven and only 20% technology. Okay. So who's governing the body behind all of this? Okay. That would be the role of the certification authorities, or CAs. Okay. It's a very critical component. None of this doesn't even work without the CAs. Okay. They are responsible for creating digital certificates, and the CAs are the ones that own the policies, the practices, and the procedures for vetting recipients and issuing the certificates. Okay. So specifically, the owners and operators of a CA, they determine, again, the vetting methods for certificate recipients, types of certificates issued, the parameters contained within the certificate, the security and operation procedures. I mean, there's all kinds of things that again that go into it. 80% policy, 20% technology. So once the CA makes these determinations, they must formally, okay, document their policies. From there, it's up to the consumer or certificates to decide how much trust they want to place in certificates from any given CA. Now, in the world of DoD and the federal government, not a lot of choices. Okay, not a lot of freedom there. It is what it is. It is very stringent. You have to stay in your swim lane. There is no deviating from it in any way, shape, or form. However, in the commercial SLED world, to include education, obviously, and this is where, again, the schools have the freedom to be able to dictate what a lot of those policies should be. However, that's where the partnership of that certification authority and the K through 12 school, they work together. because you have the expertise coming in and saying, hey, we know how to implement this type of program. However, we are not educators. And I loved how Lee opened and talked about, you know, his technology background, but yet, you know, you guys are still in that education world. And, you know, and it's so important, again, to understand that partnership and how the things are going to work together. So very important. Okay. So one thing that goes along with that is to determine the typical level of tiers that are going to exist within your PKI's CA hierarchy. Okay. So a typical CA hierarchy pretty much involves 2 tiers. Okay. So following the chain of root certificate authority, okay, which that's where the CA is, then comes into play the subordinate certificate authorities, and then you have your end entity certificates. So this is a 2-tier approach that, you know, we've seen is a great design for K through 12, right? So you have your company that you've picked. They are a root certificate authority, meaning they have the ability to stand up a subordinate certificate authority for the school systems. And then that's where the school systems can then operate within that sub CA, start sharing data. Everybody's PK enabled, and it's a wonderful thing. Okay. So why is PKI so important in today's digital age? Well, you know, other than all the things that we've talked about, I'll still reiterate it, right? So, you know, what are the rules for giving speeches? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. So I'm going to tell you again what I told you, but I'm going to use some, you know, some date parameters, sort of like what Lee did at the beginning, to talk about some of the origins. Okay. So when we look at the first wave of PKI back in, let's just say 1995 to 2002, the biggest use case for PKI during that time was to issue certificates to e-commerce websites. So it was already out there, flooded all throughout e-commerce. And you all may recall that, you know, it displayed the lock icon in the browser to give the consumer the confidence that they were visiting the right website, and that there was a secure connection when sharing credit card information to make the purchase. So, you know, I mean, we all buy plane tickets, and I think everybody's gone Amazon, you know, crazy and online shopping. So when we talk about e-commerce, that's exactly what we're talking about. Okay. So the second wave, it really start to bring the enterprise PKI, and it emerged between like 2003 to 2010. Okay. And that second wave saw, you know, use cases explode, and it led to a set of new challenges as the result. So the early 2000s saw the rise of the mobile workforce, when almost all employees received laptops, and the ability to work remotely is now become commonplace. Okay. And became commonplace then as well. So all of a sudden, employees needed to access assets outside of the office, usually through a VPN. I'm sure probably everybody on this call has used a VPN, which made authenticating devices and securing remote user access to systems more important than ever. Okay. But the third wave now, you know, now is new users and massive growing pains, which is pretty much started from 2011 to today. Okay. So the third wave of PKI, which we're still experiencing today, includes several new users around IoT, the Internet of Things, and some growing pains with the scaling of PKI along the way. So today, organizations issue millions of certificates to authenticate a fully mobile, multi-device workforce. Beyond employee devices, organizations also have to manage embedded certificates in all sorts of cloud systems. Finally, the rise of the IoT has led to millions of new connected devices, each of which needs to be secured and authenticated and able to get firmware updates. So all of these connections make PKI more important than ever and have led to enormous growth within the space. But as PKI becomes more important and more prevalent, it also gets more challenging. So specifically, today's connected digital world that creates PKI management challenges around getting certificates where they need to go and ensuring certificates are properly vetted and mapped and monitoring already issued certificates. So there's a lot that's going into this, okay? Overseeing and managing and updating millions of certificates is such a big job that most organizations now rely on third-party managed service providers and specialized certificate management tools to handle their PKI. So this trend is similar to the move to the cloud. As organizations shifted from owned data servers to third-party cloud computing providers, okay? So again, we understand that it's a very, very good practice. However, we are stressing again, do your homework. There are some PKI root certificate authorities out there that also have their own, secured cloud environment that are operating again in the very highly, regulated industry. So just do your homework. So K through 12. Engaging a managed service provider for PKI, okay, that allows each school to focus on their students and staff directly related to their line of business, okay? This is much more important rather than, this is what everybody's doing now, spending their time doing this now versus, focusing on their operating infrastructure. They're running around doing all kinds of things, and then here's where the operating infrastructure starts to suffer. And it also protects against turnover among PKI experts, because PKI experts, as I'm sure you can imagine, are very difficult to find, and it can get pretty costly. Okay, so most importantly, it improves PKI management and security by providing access to a large team that specializes in developing and running best practice PKI programs. So what are common challenges that PKI solve? Okay, and this is the last thing that I'll discuss before I move on to my favorite topic, which is eliminating username and passwords. So the common challenge that it solves is really a wide variety of use cases that exist for PKI. However, I'll close with some of the most common use cases. The first one is SSL or TLS certificates to secure web browsing experiences and communications, okay? Digital signatures on software, restricted access to enterprise intranets and VPNs, very important and still widely used. Password-free Wi-Fi access based on device ownership. Okay, that's a huge challenge that PKI solves. And lastly, email and data encryption. Truthfully, the next topic, again, is eliminating username and passwords and email and data encryption. I mean, heck, just a very simple, phase one approach like that could really solve quite a bit of problems that are not only happening within K through 12, but almost literally every business that we come across. Okay, so now it's time to talk about eliminating username and passwords, and more importantly, in my opinion, it's time to permanently eliminate username and passwords. So what you're looking at now is the password pyramid by strength, okay? And as you see at the very bottom, where it should be is the username and password, okay? It does not get any any worse than that. It's single factor. It's incredibly easy to breach, and it's shared. And I'll cover a lot of that as we continue to go on. Okay. So then organizations said, okay, that's fine. We understand username and passwords is no good. All right. So let's create OTP via SMS, and OTP stands for a one-time password. Okay. Well, keyword password. All right. Yeah, they said it's two-factor, but again, it's no good. It's shared. So then we come out with one-time password on a token. All right. Doesn't matter. Easily, spoofed and, and easily breached. So then everybody said, okay, we got it. FIDO, that's going to be the one. Fast identity online. Okay. And we like to hone in on the acronyms because you can learn a lot by the acronym, especially when you break it down. So I'm only going to focus on, two of the words, or three, depending on how you want to say it. The word fast and the word or words online. So yes, it is two-factor, and yes, it is crypto-based. However, it is done online, and you can easily, pretend to be somebody, pretend to be somebody else. Okay, that's also known as, or sort of is the the hacker in the middle. Okay, and this is where a person's identity, could be duplicated and compromised, and then go through a FIDO subscription. All right, so it doesn't really solve anything. And then when you get to the top of the password food chain, this is where PKI sits, because unlike the others, where we see a lot of organizations who say multi-factor, like multi-factor just rolls off the tongue and it sounds awesome. However, we've seen that 90% of the time when somebody is saying multi-factor, they really only mean two-factor. Okay, so the whole something you have, something you know. However, when you get to PKI, it is true multi-factor, because there's so many different form factors that you can layer on top of it. So not only is the everything that I talked about, from the generation of the key pair, the public key and the private key, and then issuing the PIN and or the biometric fingerprint that goes along with that particular user, which, by the way, it's not actually a fingerprint. When you put your fingerprint on the reader, it goes into the valleys and ridges and actually turns that into a mathematical number. So I didn't want anybody to think that your fingerprint's out there running around. It's not. It turns it into a math equation or a math number. And so this is where true multi-factor comes in. You can layer iris, you can layer facial recognition. There's all kinds of things that you can do. But one of the most important things is that with PKI, it's person bound, meaning that best practices, the vetting, at least for your tier 1 and tier 2 users, meaning like, your IT staff is, certainly an example of a tier 1 user, because they have ultimate rights to the entire infrastructure of the school, as well as tier 2, which could be your HR and your payroll folks, or your superintendent, or your cabinet members, or whatever. They fall into the tier 2 category, and therefore person bound means you're doing the vetting of them in person. So you're going through the best practice policy of verifying their driver's license, their passport, their social security number. Again, that is a part of the vetting process, where the fingerprint is put onto a reader. It turns it into a mathematical number, and it is all kinds of things that are associated with that. And that is where, and what makes person bound so important. Now, it's also, and I don't want to get off on a tangent. If I was in the room right now, this is where I'd start running around, and Jimmy and Caroline would get nervous. I want to stay focused, but I don't want everybody on this call to think that in your head, well, my God, we can't do that for, every single student. And that is in no way, shape, or form what is even being remotely suggested here. What we're saying is that, it's a typical multi-phased deployment. And within the PKI, just like PKI sits at the top of this pyramid, you also then have the PKI pyramid within itself, and then you have different layers of strength. There's browser certs that could be deployed to students. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that you can do that are not as stringent. And again, this is why if a school decides to take the plunge and move towards this, it's really important to get with an organization that understands it and can help you with those applicable policies. Okay, but again, just going back to the very, very, very basic, Microsoft, they published a report telling on themselves, and I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just they reported data on themselves, which they stated within their environment that they have an average of 579 password breaches per second. Okay, that equates to over 18 billion breaches annually. So when you look at an IT organization and the size of it, I mean, we follow the publications, and they published numerous reports that it costs on average $77 per password reset. So the average, and okay, I mean, that's a god awful amount of money, right? I mean, that's a lot of money that's being spent here, and time. But then to make it even scarier, the average person maintains an average of 30 passwords on their various devices and applications. So, I mean, you could be looking at a complete nightmare trying to keep all of this stuff straight, which, probably majority of you on this call right now are hopefully shaking your head going, yep, it's something I deal with on a constant basis. So today's IT security teams, they need to be able to recognize and authenticate identities throughout the enterprise. So whether those identities belong to humans or devices or data or applications, it doesn't matter. Passwords, they used to offer a measure of security, but and I'm sure we all agree, okay, that they're just no longer effective. That's because the bad actors have become increasingly adept at tricking users into entering passwords at a phishing website, which I go back to the training and we talk about why that is so important. They're adept at stealing passwords in transit through the internet, a lot of the piggybacking, the lifting of passwords from password repositories. I mean, this one just makes me want to, mess up my hair, which I don't have that much of, but I still want to mess it up when I think of a password repository. Let's just stick it all in there and give someone access to all of them. Discovering other places where stolen passwords have been reused, and obtaining passwords through brute force. Okay. And by the way, I don't want anybody to think that brute force is, somebody runs up behind you and whips you over the head with a big stick or something. Brute force is actually a cryptographic hack, and that relies on guessing possible combinations of a targeted password until the correct password is discovered. So just wanted to define what brute force was. So in fact, a recent study that found that 62% of breaches that were not caused by either an error or misuse or physical action involved phishing, stolen credentials, or brute force. Okay, so if it wasn't caused by, again, the error or misuse, of physical action, this is where the phishing and the stolen credentials and the brute force was right there at the top. These issues are compounded by, again, the human factor. That's why, again, we like to talk about where is the biggest problem. You know, a lot of organizations, if they would just look within, and again, it's not that, you know, the user base or the employees or the students or anything like that are you know, running around with, you know, malicious intent. I mean, obviously there are some. However, you have to protect the people from the people, okay? Because these are the people that continue to reuse, and they share, and they continually forget their passwords. So the end result is that the cost to the enterprise, or in your case, the school, is astronomical, not only because of data loss and outages and the compromise of information, but also because passwords have to frequently reset and or undergo complex changes to them, okay? So with all of that being said, PKI enables the passwordless enterprise, or in your case, K-12. So clearly, security professionals such as you all must rethink their strategies for determining access to data and network infrastructure, right? So digital identities need to be strong so that they cannot be stolen, and that they need to be future-proof so that the enterprise can stay ahead of the threats. So the best remedy is to replace passwords with authentication based on public key infrastructure. Easy. It's not that difficult to do, and you'll thank yourself that you did it. PKI has been in use again for decades. This is what I started out with, and what we talked about, and how this thing was grown through the Department of Defense, the federal government. E-commerce has been relying upon it for so long. Even the Treasury Department, okay, and they're considered to be the absolute highest standard for authentication and encryption. So much so that it has become an integral part of, you know, our modern life, or the new norm, and often without, you know, even noticing. So it's been out there in different, you know, different forms. We just don't know it. So credit cards and passports and e-commerce websites and the like are now they're routinely using PKI to authenticate and digitally sign and encrypt to protect data from, you know, theft and or tampering.
So, hey, Jason, Jimmy cutting in here. We've actually come up on time with all this great information. I know that Lee had turned his camera back on. I want to just let everybody know, if you have to drop, we only have about 5 or 10 more minutes, and we can take some questions, or if there's a question before somebody wants to go. But we're wrapping up right here, right now. I just wanted to be real cognizant of everybody's time, because it is actually 3:30 Central right now.
Yeah, so anybody's got any questions, we'll hang out a little bit longer, as long as you need to stay. And
yeah, I apologize. I get going.
no, that's okay.
It's hard to shut me up.
Yeah, so there's still 18 participants on the call. If you'd like to stay on, and if you've got another 5 to 10 minutes, we want to just kind of wrap up here. I apologize for not jumping in sooner, Jason. Actually, there's more people jumping into the room as we speak. So, Jason, you wanted, we'll give it another second to see if anybody has any question, if they have to go. Also, our information can be shared if you want to ask us direct questions, or send in questions.
Yeah.
Questions to the tech forum afterwards that we could answer. If not, we'll allow Jason to wrap up really quick here.
Okay, I'll take that as a sign to make it quick. So, like Jimmy said, I am here at the end. So, okay, let's put a bow on this. So, as PKI, it has evolved to become even more versatile. Okay, interoperability, high uptime, and governance. Governance is really important. Are still key benefits, but you know, today's PKI solutions, they're also very capable of automation, scalability, crypto agility, and visibility. Okay. So what I mean by automation is, you know, completing individual tasks while minimizing manual processes. Scalability is, you know, managing the certificates. crypto agility is, being able to update the cryptographic strength and revoking and replacing at-risk certificates. And then visibility is just that. It's viewing the certificate status with a, kind of like a single pane of glass, if you will. Okay. So I'll close and summarize why PKI provides stronger authentication than passwords. And then I'm going to just to reiterate a few points I've discussed during the presentation. Okay. So to protect, a password protected identity from being stolen, the password must be kept secret. Okay. It's not going to work, but in order to use it, the password must be shared. All right. This is where the whole thing crumbles in upon itself. It is for precisely this reason that passwords fail. They rely on sharing a secret that may be either accidentally or purposefully misused. So by contrast, authentication via PKI happens when the user proves she or he is in the possession of the private key. Then the transaction signed by the private key is verified by the public key. This certificate-based authentication is absolutely far superior to password-based authentication. Okay, and that's because the private key is never with the client, right? The private key it cannot be stolen in transit because it's never transmitted. The private key can't be stolen from the server repository. And lastly, there is no need to change passwords or enter usernames. So, I guess the last slide here, maybe you can throw up that present or that last slide, Jimmy, in closing, is that at a minimum, absolute minimum, K through 12 should look at, some type of phase 1 implementation, like I said, where you're at least protecting tier 1 and tier 2 staff within the school. Normally, like I said, there's, 5 phases that are associated with it. And there's all kinds of different levels, of PKI security. It doesn't all have to be what you're seeing here, which is that credential that John James Baker is holding. But, again, phase 1 of, protecting the IT staff and the tier 2 users, which could include the financial systems and more importantly, the student learning systems, this is where it all comes together. So when you look at that credential contains the 4 certificates on there. The 4 certificates are the identity, the encryption, the logical and the physical side to it. And what we mean by logical access is obviously the email and the access to the various network or within your infrastructure. And then obviously physical could mean, or does mean rather, to unlock doors and can allow you access into various portions of a school. And this is something that, again, per whatever your policy is, you can define different access points for different folks, and there's all type of different form factors that you can also use to be able to access that area. So that's pretty much it. Sorry, I ran over.
Thank you, Jason. That was a lot of stuff, and thank you. You did a good job of presenting it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your expertise and experience and sharing it with us. We know this is a lot to take in. For many of us, it's a new way to look at authenticating our users and getting them in safely. But I think just the idea of, I can think of the hours and hours we spent dealing with changing passwords. Should we change passwords? I had administrators who wouldn't change their password because they didn't want to learn a new one. So going to a passwordless system would be wonderful in managing. I can imagine that. It would save so much time, or we were being insecure because people didn't want to change their passwords. And I could see this would be a great solution.
Yep. Well, the first time you access, into your laptop and or your device, and you're reading it, and you put in either the 4 or 6-digit PIN, or if you want to use, again, the bio, I promise you, we run across companies all the time. And I think I was, saying this to you just in our general conversations, Lee. We hear all the time, wow, we should have done this a long time ago. And we're like, yeah, no kidding. It really does make life a whole lot easier and certainly a lot safer.
So in wrapping up, if anybody's got any question, we came to bring this to you today to show that this is a possibility. We understand it's a lot of learning to do, but we'll be bringing this topic up more and more as we go throughout the year and making people aware. You can contact me, you can contact the Tech Forum. We'll have the contact information for Jason and Jimmy out there for you in the notes. And I'll be sending follow-up email too for everybody. Just before we end it, thanks Jimmy to you too for your